My name is Amber, and at 32 years old, I didn't think my life would change over a dinner table, surrounded by ring lights, curated cocktails, and people who measured human worth in follower counts. But it did, and it happened the moment he laughed at me. Not a warm laugh, not even a nervous one, a scoff. I need a man with a real career, my boyfriend said, swirling his drink like he was auditioning for a lifestyle reel. Not some maintenance girl fixing toilets. His influencer friends fell silent for half a second, the kind of silence that's louder than shouting. Then a few awkward chuckles. Someone pretended to check their phone. Another lifted a glass to hide a smirk. I felt every eye slide toward me. My hands were steady when I set my napkin down. My heart wasn't. It was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. But my voice surprised even me when I said calmly, "Good to know." Then I stood up and walked out. No yelling, no tears, no dramatic speech, just the quiet snap of something finally breaking. At that point, he still thought I was just the woman who fixed broken air conditioners in his building, the one who wore work boots instead of heels, the girlfriend he was temporarily settling for until someone more impressive came along. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the name on his apartment lease wasn't just some corporate entity. It was mine. I am the owner of the building he lives in. I inherited it from my grandfather 3 years ago, a 240-unit property worth over $8 million. And I chose to work maintenance, because I believe dignity doesn't come from a title, it comes from responsibility. A few hours after I left that restaurant, my phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. Messages from him, confused, annoyed, slightly panicked. But the real moment, the one that sealed everything, came later that night. When he finally checked his lease, when he saw the signature, and when he realized that the woman he'd just humiliated in front of his friends, the one he called a handyman, was the same woman who decided whether he'd still have a roof over his head in 6 weeks. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't expose him online. I simply let the truth stand where his disrespect used to be. And sometimes, that's the most devastating consequence of all. I'm 32 years old. I've spent most of my adult life learning how buildings breathe, how pipes complain before they burst, how old wiring hums when it's tired, how people reveal themselves when something stops working. I didn't grow up rich. My grandfather did. Or rather, he built what little wealth we had with his hands, one problem at a time. Riverside Gardens wasn't always a polished 240-unit complex. When my grandfather bought the land, it was half abandoned, riddled with leaks, mold, and broken promises from previous owners. He lived on site for the first 5 years, fixed units himself, collected rent in envelopes, knew every tenant by name. When I was a teenager, he used to take me with him on weekends. While my friends were at the mall, I was holding flashlights, passing him tools, listening. Never be ashamed of knowing how things work, he'd tell me. Titles change, skills don't. I studied property management and operations in college. I could have gone corporate. I had offers. But when my grandfather passed away 3 years ago and left me Riverside Gardens, I made a decision that confused almost everyone. I didn't hire a management company. I became the maintenance supervisor. On paper, yes, I'm the owner. But day to day, I fix HVAC systems. I handle plumbing emergencies at midnight. I coordinate inspections. I manage a small maintenance team who take pride in solving problems most people never want to think about unless something goes wrong. And I love it. That's where I met him. He lives in apartment 4B. He moved in about 8 months ago. Confident, charming, always dressed like he'd just stepped out of a photo shoot. He works as a social media coordinator for local brands, knows how to talk, knows how to sell a version of life that looks good on screens. Our first conversation was over a leaky faucet. He thanked me for fixing it so quickly, told me most maintenance girls weren't as thorough. I should have noticed the tone then, the casual hierarchy in his words, but I didn't. We started talking, then texting, then dating. At first, things were easy. He liked that I was low drama, that I didn't need constant reassurance, that I was independent. He told his friends I was refreshingly grounded. I took that as a compliment. I didn't tell him I owned the building, not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to know who he was without that information. I wanted to be chosen without the shadow of money. He knew what I did. He just never respected it. The comments were subtle at first. Don't you ever want something bigger? You're too smart to be doing this forever. I just worry you're limiting yourself. I brushed it off, told myself he meant well, told myself love was about compromise. His friends were another story. Influencers. marketers, people who spoke in metrics. Every dinner felt like a performance. Careers were compared, brands were name-dropped. Someone always had a new restaurant recommendation that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. And slowly, imperceptibly, I started to feel smaller. Not because of my work, but because of how he talked about it. He never introduced me as my girlfriend who manages a property. I was the maintenance girl. I noticed how his family reacted too. His mother would ask when I planned to move on to something more suitable. His sister once joked that I must be great in emergencies. They smiled when they said it. Smiles can cut deeper than insults. Still, I stayed, because love makes you patient, and hope makes you quiet. I thought if I just gave it time, he'd see the value in what I do, in who I am. I didn't realize I was already being measured, and found lacking. The first real crack didn't come from him. It came from the way the room changed when I spoke. We were at a small gathering, nothing formal. One of his coworkers had invited a few people over. The conversation drifted, as it always did, toward careers, promotions, brand deals. Someone asked me what I did, and before I could answer, he answered for me. She works in apartment maintenance. Not manages, not runs, just works. There was a pause, a few polite nods. Then the conversation moved on, as if I'd quietly stepped out of the room without moving. Later in the car, I said gently, I actually manage the whole... He waved it off. Yeah, same thing. Same thing. That word stayed with me. After that, the comments started stacking up. Small, persistent, like water dripping on stone. He'd forward me job listings as a joke. Office roles, entry-level sales positions. Anything that involved a desk and a dress code. Just saying, he'd add. You look great in something more professional. When I'd come home tired after an emergency call, flooded unit, burst pipe, he'd wrinkle his nose at the smell of metal and dust on my clothes. You're really doing this at night too? He'd ask. That can't be healthy. It wasn't concern. It was embarrassment. His friends started getting involved. One of them, Knox Sterling, the influencer with 50,000 followers and a voice trained for microphones, cornered me once and said, "He mentioned you might be open to career advice. I know people in sales." I stared at him, stunned, because I hadn't mentioned anything, because I wasn't looking. When I told my boyfriend later that it made me uncomfortable, he sighed like I was being difficult. They're just trying to help. You're being sensitive. Sensitive. Another word that erases. The atmosphere shifted in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. When we walked together, he'd slow his pace if he spotted colleagues ahead, just enough to create distance. At events, he'd drift toward people who looked more on brand. And then there was the building. My building. He started complaining about rent. About noise, about maintenance schedules, about how much he was paying for what he got. Once, half joking, half not, he said, "If I were dating someone higher up here, maybe I'd get better treatment." I remember freezing. Not because he didn't know the truth, but because of what that comment revealed. It wasn't about love, it was about leverage. The final seed was planted on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a ladder in the hallway, checking ductwork. Mrs. Drummond, one of our longest tenants, was chatting with me, telling me about her granddaughter. My boyfriend came home for lunch with her. I saw his face change. Red, tight, ashamed. Mrs. Drummond smiled and said, "Oh, is this your boyfriend? She takes such good care of this place." He practically hissed, "Yes," and dragged her inside. That night he exploded. "I can't keep doing this," he snapped. "It's humiliating. I can't bring you around my colleagues anymore." I asked quietly, "Why?" "Because what am I supposed to say?" he shot back. "That my girlfriend crawls around dirty maintenance areas? That you're up ladders like some handyman?" Handyman. Again. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just listened. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Because love doesn't ask you to shrink, and respect doesn't come with conditions. The conflict wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The night everything broke wasn't dramatic at first. No slammed doors. No shouting in the street. Just a dinner reservation and too many phones on the table. He wanted me to come. Said it would be good for us. A chance for me to see his world. I agreed, even though my body already felt tired in that familiar warning way. The restaurant was expensive in a quiet, intentional way. Dim lights, minimalist decor, menus without prices. The kind of place designed to make you feel like you'd earned the right to be there. His friends were already seated. Influencers, brand consultants, people who spoke fluently in sponsorships and algorithms. Knox was there, of course. Someone asked what everyone was working on. Deals were listed, numbers were compared, laughter rose and fell on cue. Then Knox turned to me. "So," he said, smiling like a host, "what's next for you? Long-term career goals?" I opened my mouth, and before a single word could leave it, he interrupted. "She's in apartment maintenance," he said, waving his hand lightly. "So, not really a career trajectory there." The table went silent. Not awkward silent, evaluating silent. I felt heat rush to my face. My chest tightened. My fingers curled slightly against my thigh under the table. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else sipped wine. A couple of people smiled politely, like they didn't quite know where to look. And then laughter. Soft, dismissive, enough to let everyone off the hook. I stayed still. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Because suddenly, I didn't want to. I looked at him, at the ease with which he minimized me, at how natural it was for him to decide my worth out loud. And I knew. This wasn't ignorance. This was belief. Later that night, after we left, he didn't apologize. He doubled down. "I need security," he said, pacing the apartment. "I'm 26. I can't waste time. I need a partner who can provide." Provide. The word hung heavy between us. "My friends are dating lawyers, marketing directors, people with real careers," he continued. "And I'm supposed to be okay with someone who fixes toilets?" That was the moment my body reacted before my mind caught up. My shoulders went still, my breathing slowed. I said, "Understood." That was all. He smiled, relieved. Thought he'd won. Thought I'd finally agreed to change. The next morning, he started sending me job listings. Sales roles, office positions, anything with a tie. And something inside me went quiet. Because when someone shows you who they are, it's not your job to argue. It's your job to listen. Shock doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like efficiency. The morning after that dinner, I went to work earlier than usual. I checked boilers, reviewed maintenance logs, answered tenant emails. My hands moved automatically, but my thoughts lagged behind, circling the same questions over and over. How long has he been thinking this? How often has he been embarrassed by me without saying it? At what point did love become a resume review? His messages kept coming. Links, screenshots. This one has growth potential. This would look better on LinkedIn. At least apply. I didn't respond. Not because I was sulking, but because I was listening to something I'd ignored for months. My own discomfort. That evening, he called me during my lunch break. "You're being stubborn," he said, not unkindly. "I'm trying to help you see the bigger picture." I asked him calmly, "What picture is that?" Silence, then a sigh. "The life I want," he said. "The people I'm around. I need my partner to fit." Fit, like furniture. That was the first time I confronted him. Not loudly, not emotionally, just directly. "I like my job," I said. "Even if I didn't own anything else in my life, I'd still respect this work." He laughed, actually laughed. "You're romanticizing it," he said. "Manual labor isn't ambition." That word again. Ambition. As if dignity required a suit. As if fixing things that keep people warm in winter somehow meant dreaming small. I asked him what he wanted me to do, specifically. He didn't hesitate. "Apply for management trainee positions, sales, anything where you wear a blazer instead of work boots." I realized then he wasn't asking me to grow. He was asking me to perform. And for the first time, I wondered, not angrily but honestly, whether telling him the truth would change anything. Because if he only respected me when he knew what I owned, then he never really respected me at all. I didn't decide anything that night. But something fundamental shifted. I stopped defending myself, stopped explaining, stopped shrinking. And that scared him more than anger ever could. Once I stopped pushing back, the pressure didn't ease. It intensified. He started talking to other people about me, about fixing me, as if I were a project that just needed better guidance. I found out the same way you always do, not from the person you trust, but from someone who assumes you already know. Knox approached me in the grocery store one Saturday morning. Casual, smiling, holding almond milk and protein bars like a walking stereotype. "Hey," he said, "your boyfriend mentioned you might be open to career advice. I know a few people in sales if you want connections." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't concern, this was coordination. When I told my boyfriend later that it bothered me, he shrugged. "They're just helping. You should be grateful." Grateful. The humiliation peaked a few days later. I was inspecting HVAC units, up on a ladder in the hallway, when he came home for lunch with Mrs. Drummond walking behind him. She smiled, waved, asked how my grandfather used to fix things the old-fashioned way. His face flushed crimson. That evening he lost control. I can't bring you around my colleagues anymore, he snapped. It's embarrassing. Why? I asked. Because they'll see you like that, he said, gesturing vaguely, like some handyman. That word landed harder than any insult. Not because it was false, but because it revealed how deeply he believed it. The final straw came when Clover from the leasing office pulled me aside. She lowered her voice. I probably shouldn't say this, but he's been complaining, a lot, about rent, about maintenance. He said if his girlfriend owned the place instead of just working here, he'd get better treatment. I went still, not angry, just done. This wasn't just about me anymore. He disrespected my staff, my tenants, my grandfather's legacy, and he had no idea who he was talking about. His lease renewal was 6 weeks away, and for the first time since we started dating, I didn't wonder what he would decide. I knew what I would. The loneliest part wasn't the arguments. It was the quiet after. The way I'd lie awake at night, listening to the building settle, the distant hum of the boiler, the soft click of pipes cooling, sounds that had always comforted me. Now they felt heavy, like reminders of a life I was being asked to abandon. I loved him, or at least I loved who I thought he was. And that grief crept in slowly, not dramatic, just a dull ache behind my ribs. The breaking point came at the party. Friday night, his apartment. Loud music, too many people, too much performance. Influencer friends filled the space, phones out, glasses raised. I arrived late after handling an emergency repair call. Knox greeted me loudly. Hey, you should come to Leonard's next weekend. Whole influencer dinner thing. Before I could answer, my boyfriend laughed. That's why I need to upgrade from dating building maintenance, he said. Can't exactly afford nice places on a handyman salary. The room froze. Then laughter, forced, uncomfortable. Something inside me finally cracked. Not rage, resolution. Later, when Mrs. Drummond knocked to ask them to keep it down, he was rude, dismissive, cruel in a way that felt effortless. The next morning, she found me in the lobby. She looked at me gently and said, Your grandfather would be proud of how you take care of this place. That boy you're dating, I'm disappointed in his attitude toward honest work. I went to my office and closed the door. And I cried. Not because of what he'd said, but because I finally accepted that the man I loved didn't exist. Only the man he'd been pretending not to be. That was my lowest point. And also, the moment I stopped hoping he'd change. The shift didn't come with a dramatic speech. It came with paperwork. Sunday morning, I sat in my office alone. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, landing on blueprints my grandfather had once drawn by hand. I ran my fingers along the edges of his old notebook, the one where he'd written tenant names, birthdays, notes like, Mrs. D, heater runs loud, check before winter. This building wasn't an investment to him. It was a responsibility. And suddenly everything became very clear. I wasn't punishing my boyfriend by telling the truth. I wasn't testing him. I wasn't trying to teach him a lesson. I was protecting something that mattered more than my feelings. Respect. I spoke with Dine, my assistant. He didn't sugarcoat it. The way he talks about this work, Dine said, jaw tight. It's insulting, not just to you, to all of us. Then Clover told me something that sealed it. She'd overheard my boyfriend complaining, again, about rent, about maintenance noise during normal hours, about how the staff was unprofessional. He'd even hinted that dating me was the only reason he'd tolerated substandard service. That was it. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt finished. His lease renewal meeting was already scheduled for Thursday afternoon. He'd requested it personally, convinced he could negotiate a rent reduction. Confident. Entitled. He had no idea. I called my attorney. Everything was clean, legal. Non-renewal of an expiring lease was within my rights. Then I made one final decision. I wouldn't reveal the truth in private, because private apologies are easy. Public accountability is not. On Thursday, he would learn who he'd been dating, who he'd been looking down on, and what disrespect really costs. Not out of cruelty, but because consequences don't need anger to be effective. They only need truth. I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Thursday afternoon arrived quietly, too quietly for what it was about to undo. I dressed differently that day, not out of vanity, but intention. A tailored suit, low heels, hair pulled back, the version of myself I usually reserved for board meetings and legal reviews. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because truth deserves clarity. Clover called an hour before the meeting. He's already here, she said, and he's not happy. I could hear him through the phone before she even finished the sentence. Complaining about soundproofing, about outdated systems, about incompetent maintenance staff. I arrived 10 minutes later. As I walked down the hallway toward the leasing office, I heard his voice clearly through the door. For what I'm paying, this is unacceptable. The maintenance people make noise during business hours. The service is slow, and frankly, it doesn't feel professionally run. Clover let him talk. 10 full minutes. Then she said calmly, "Actually, lease renewals are handled directly by the owner. He'll be joining us." "I don't care," he snapped. "Where is he?" That was my cue. Clover opened the door. I walked in. "Good afternoon," I said evenly. "I understand you have concerns about building management." The color drained from his face. Not slowly, instantly. He looked from me to Clover, back to me, like his brain was trying and failing to reconcile two realities at once. Why are you here?" he stammered. I sat down across from him, folded my hands on the table. "I've owned Riverside Gardens for 3 years," I said. "I inherited it from my grandfather." Silence, the kind that presses on your ears. I continued, voice steady. "I work maintenance because I believe in understanding every part of the business. Hands-on management helps me serve tenants better." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You never told me." "You never asked," I replied. Clover slid a folder across the table. "Your lease expires tomorrow," I said. "Based on what I've just heard, it seems you're unhappy with the property, the staff, and the overall management." He leaned forward quickly. No, that's not what I meant. I was just frustrated. About money. I didn't know. This is a misunderstanding." I opened the folder. Inside were printed complaints. 6 of them. Filed over 8 months. Noise complaints about essential maintenance during normal hours. A complaint about DNA responding to a neighbor's plumbing emergency. A complaint about me spending too much time in the building after hours. I read them out loud, slowly. He sank back into his chair. "Mrs. Drummond also submitted a written statement," Clover added gently, "regarding your behavior during the party." He looked at me then, not with anger, not even with shame, with panic. "I didn't mean it," he said quickly. "I was stressed. I love you. We can work this out." I met his eyes. "You didn't hurt my feelings," I said quietly. "You showed me who you are." I closed the folder. I don't think someone who looks down on honest work would be comfortable living in a building owned by a maintenance woman. No lease renewal. 30 days to vacate. Generous, final. As we stood to leave, he reached for my arm. "Please," he said, "this doesn't have to end us." I stepped back. "It already did," I said, "long before today." By Monday, he was gone. By Friday, the story had spread. His influencer friends distanced themselves. Quietly. Efficiently. Disrespect toward working people isn't a good look online. And for the first time since I met him, the building felt lighter. When he moved out, the apartment felt strangely hollow. Not because I missed him, but because silence has a way of revealing what noise once hid. I watched from the courtyard as professional movers carried his furniture down the stairs. Quick, efficient, expensive. The kind of service he always demanded, now paid for out of pocket on short notice. I felt no satisfaction in that, only finality. Mrs. Drummond stopped by later that afternoon. "I heard he's gone," she said gently. I nodded. She smiled in that knowing way older people do when they've lived long enough to recognize patterns. "Good. Your grandfather wouldn't have liked the way he talked about honest work." That night, I walked the property like I always do. Checked lights, listened to the hum of systems running smoothly, said hello to tenants who'd lived here longer than he ever had. Denny and the maintenance team joked about the situation, not cruelly, just relieved. For months, they'd felt the sting of his dismissiveness. Seeing accountability restored something important. As for him, the irony settled in quietly. His rent here had been reasonable, affordable, stable. Now he was paying significantly more to live somewhere with worse maintenance and less care, all because he couldn't respect the people who kept his previous life comfortable. I didn't expose him. I didn't gloat. I didn't chase vindication. I simply chose alignment. With my values, with my work, with myself. I learned something essential through all of this. Love isn't about status. Ambition isn't about appearance. And dignity doesn't come from how others rank you. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. My grandfather was right. You can't run a business or a relationship you don't understand from the ground up. I still wear work boots. I still fix things with my hands. I still believe that people who maintain, build, and repair the world deserve respect. And anyone who can't see the value in that, they don't belong in my life. Not anymore.